across the street. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Greg Reedman. I'm President of your Chamber of Commerce, and we're delighted to have you here for our second annual Transportation Forum. I want to give a shout out to New Wellesley Hospital for sponsoring the event today. Thank you so much for that. And also to our partners here at TripAdvisor for hosting our event. And also our friends with the 128 Business Shuttle, which is parked right there. Someone may take a ride on it today, but they do connect a lot of our employees to this office park to the Green Line, which is a great opportunity. If you are a company in this office park and some of the other areas, you want to check that out. They will give you a ride back to the Green Line for once point completion of our program. We're going to start hearing from the general manager of ET, and then we have a panel program that I hope you'll stick around for, where we'll talk about some of the issues related to housing and development and transportation and how they're all interconnected. So about a 90-minute program overall. We're really excited to welcome Phil Ang with us, General Manager. Thank you so much for being with us. Phil Ang is the General Manager and CEO of the MBTA. He's a civil engineer who has more than 40 years of transportation experience, including as president of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, Long Island Railroad, and interim president of New York City Transit. In 2023, Governor Healy appointed him to this job that he has now. His first day on the job, as I remember well, you started at Riverside Station, took the Green Line in for your first duties, and we were glad to have you start here on the Green Line. At the time, he faced maintenance backlogs, all kinds of track slowdowns and everything else that you may even know about, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. But yesterday, you received $535 million in transportation infrastructure upgrades. So I hope you'll at least also prepared to spend that $535 million today, as well as everything else. Please welcome General Manager Phil Ang.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. These are fantastic opportunities for me to get out and really talk to folks, businesses, communities, leaders, not only what the MBTA is doing, but how can our partnerships help one another, right? And it's all about communication. I've always said building, the engineering, the technical, those are the easy parts. It's the communication of why something is important, even challenging things, and how do we make those things that we all strive for realities that actually result in meaningful things to folks. And, Greg talked about when I first came in a little over 2 years ago. A lot of the questions like, why can't the MBTA be like XYZ agency somewhere else? And, my real answer is that we have a great system. It needs a little tender loving care. And we're going to make it so proud that not only the folks that live and work and play in Massachusetts are proud of it, but we want everyone else to start comparing themselves to us. Get rid of this one?
No, just this one.
And, from the very beginning, Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, their administration, the whole interview process was about how do we fix the T? How do we actually make transportation what people need, what they deserve? And they had always talked about making it a priority. And they've been true to their word. They have never wavered from that, and they have given us the ability to really start making positive improvements. And we've made some good changes. We have a long way to go. Greg mentioned the legislature, the House, the Senate. I remember even in the very beginning, the first budget, the 24 budget, had money for hiring, had money for safety, had money for water transportation, had money for income eligible fares, and a number of things. And yes, there's no budget that will ever cover all of our needs, but our commitment is that how do we take those dollars and how do we actually use them wisely, deliver results, and actually make sure that when someone chooses to invest in the MBTA, as public servants, we're using those taxpayer dollars to actually give back to the public. And that's the exciting part. I have been in transportation for over 40 years. I had gone to the private side for 9 months, and I missed what we were doing. I missed that day to day. And maybe it's crazy, But when you can make a positive impact on people and communities and businesses, and there's nothing better, despite the challenges. In 2 years, with the investments, we've started to rebuild the workforce. And at the last board meeting just last week, I talked about it's not just more dollars and more headcount, it's how we actually reinvest in the workforce, training, looking at the procedures, giving them the tools that they need to be more successful, giving them the access, the ability to actually get in and do the work that they need to do, and give them the ability to do it right. So many agencies, you mentioned New York City Transit, Greg, you mentioned Long Island Railroad. When I had the ability to get into there, a lot of those agencies, and actually across the nation right now, a lot are struggling with speed restrictions and public trust, confidence. And it's because it's not easy to necessarily say, I'm going to shut something down to fix it. And you could actually do that for a while until all of a sudden the fixes are not just maintenance, the fixes are beyond actually corrective repair. The fixes, but what we're doing right now, the last 2 years, has been full depth replacement from top to bottom of our track infrastructure. And you can't do that in 2 hours on the overnight. But what we did do is we accelerated, and I know those diversions were painful to the public. This last week, I've been riding Blue Line shuttle buses as part of my commute. And when you're sitting in traffic, it is frustrating, and I know it. But I do ride it because I need to feel what our riders are feeling. And that's important to them to know that we use the system just like everyone else. But we did something that no one believed we could do. Maybe I wasn't even sure if we could do it when I announced it, but we did that. And that's because we reinvested in the workforce, we reinvested in the leadership team, and we challenged ourselves that let's not be saying, let's do less because it's safer. Let's push ourselves to do more, because that's what the public expects. So track improvement, absolutely a success. A lot more work, which is why this year we continue to have diversions to get that to the point where we are almost at a state of good repair. There are areas now on Red Line where it's like 99% of our ties are in good condition. And just 2 years ago, we talked about needing $2 billion to get track to a state of good repair. We haven't spent close to $2 billion, and we're getting back. So that's how we want to show we can use these dollars wisely. Track, getting new cars. We're getting, later this summer, all the Orange Line cars will be fully delivered. Red Line cars continue to come in so we can replace our legacy fleet. Another point of delays, signal upgrades. Red and orange signal upgrades are ongoing. Green Line, Type 10s are in design right now. We expect to get the first pilot cars next year with revenue cars for the Type 10s to eventually get rid of the Type 7s and Type 8 and deliver more modern trolley service for our riders on green. The commuter rail, tremendous support again from the folks that fund us. We're buying more bi-level coaches from Hyundai Rotem. We fulfilled each of our orders to make sure that we're maximizing the contract, because the regional rail, which we are moving towards, has shown that more frequent all-day service, weekends and weekdays, has given more flexibility to people to be able to use the rail. And that is something that really, I believe the agency made those changes in 2021. A lot of agencies still have traditional, very high morning service for peak, very traditional high afternoon service in the reverse direction for peak. And then off day, it's every few hours. And weekends, it's every few hours. And I know myself, when I lived on Long Island, I would go to a different branch that had more frequency than the one that was close to my home because of that frequency. And particularly now with more flexible work schedules, the ability to have all day, more frequent service is critical. Right now, on the Worcester corridor, we have a signal contract that's going on. We invested $20 million. Those signal upgrades on that Worcester corridor will allow us to go from 45-minute frequency to 30-minute frequency. And we anticipate the frequency of those lines to be sometime after the World Cup next year. One of the reasons for that is, while we're pushing ourselves to accelerate it, is World Cup is going to need its own scheduled service. And how do we handle the millions of visitors, the demand to get folks to Gillette Stadium for 7 almost Super Bowl type events, and then deliver the robust service that the regular riders that use our system 365 days a year need. commuter rail stations. There's so many that I want to make more state-of-the-art, more modern, more old-door accessible boarding. We recently, back in March, launched a program where we could use some of our dollars to be able to make accessibility a priority. Wellesley was one of the ones that got a mini-high platform. I give a lot of credit to Laura Brelsford, head of our system-wide accessibility team, and the folks that worked with her, to be able to come up with a solution that the feds would allow us to implement to deliver accessibility sooner, and at the same time not put us in a bind where we couldn't afford to do the work. Because once we touch certain systems, they're required that we have to come in now and do a whole build. And not that I don't want to do it, but with limited dollars, I need to find a way to make those dollars give more benefit to more people, not just one location. Some of the things I do talk about when we deliver service or when you see a project in a different part of the corridor, know that improvements on those corridors actually benefit, even if it's not directly in your city or your town. The ability for us to run end-to-end improved service, more frequent service, is also important, that we are working to improve service at other locations. So for instance, if we're building a station somewhere outside your community, know that a full height platform allows us to board quicker, allows us to let people exit quicker, and allows the trains to keep moving along the line. We're really excited about the battery electric multiple units on the Fairmont line. It's going to be electrified by 2028. But know that that effort is going to allow us to actually test the BEMUs, as they're called, on other corridors. So the Needham Heights line, absolutely, given the distance traveled, is something where our BEMU we can take a look at. And we're going to look at how to get the future and bring it in closer. I remember on Long Island, billions of dollars, everyone talked about electrifying certain corridors. And it seems like it can never happen. But the BEMU is a way to show that we're taking the dollars we have today and we want to start bringing those to reality. Success, things of that nature, allows us to foster more success and more support. And that's why, my commitment is to show that we can deliver with the dollars we have and not keep saying, if I don't have more, I can't do something. And I think that's why the legislature, the governor, they're putting their trust in us, and that makes it even more, let me say, I'm going to make myself work harder to demonstrate that that trust is well placed. The last thing I want to do is to take the money and not deliver on commitments that we want to do. So all of these things we're building towards better transportation network. Hiring, talked about earlier, bus trips are key. They carry more than 40% of our ridership. They connect all of our systems where we don't have rail, or we don't have water transportation, and they're vital. They're vital to allowing people that need to get from different places, those different connections. We're right now in the midst of looking at how better to modify, if necessary, routes that make those trips shorter, but still connect people. And I know every change where we look to improve does affect other people, because transportation is personal. And if you have a certain route that you like, and we look to make it what we think is better, we want the feedback, because that feedback allows us to actually take into consideration the positive impacts and maybe the potential negative impacts to people. But I'm really excited about bus, because back in, I think, 2 years ago, just before all the hiring took place, just before we changed the way we schedule our bus routes, I believe they told me we had 8% drop trips. And when you're running 75,000 bus trips a week, 8% amounts to quite a few drop trips. Just this last month in May, we're at 0.6% drop trips. That is a testament to the administration's support of our hiring, but it's also a testament to how we're looking at schedules and how do we actually build those schedules based on availability of resources, not just schedule and try to fill them. The other key piece about that is focus on the workforce, because we're trying to eliminate what we call the split shifts, meaning we need crews for the morning, we need crews for the afternoon, and they get unreasonable several-hour break in between where it just makes for a really long day. So those are key things. This morning we just celebrated the renaming of 2 ferries the Harvard Gem and the Abigail Adams, and we engage with students, third graders, fourth graders, to help us come up with those names. But the key part is water transportation is really thriving. It's exciting to be part of our portfolio. We're doing that. Paratransit continues to be a key component as well for folks that need that type of service. I remember when we were concerned about income eligible overloading our system to handle it. What we did is, we reinvested in the workforce, we reinvested in the operators for paratransit, and because of that, we were able to retain their workforce, even grow the workforce. And I believe our paratransit on-time performance is somewhere around 96%, which is really huge for folks that depend on that service. Every area we're actually improving. We're running more trips. We're having less drop trips. They're faster, they're more frequent. And we're only just scratching the surface of what we need to do. And one other key piece is, how do we connect with other transit providers through RTAs, and how do we make sure that, our services, when we get folks to these different destinations, are able to take other modes that they need. There's been a big part of our efforts to really coordinate with RTAs, commuter rail schedules. Some of these that we've done recently is actually share them with the RTAs before we publish them, so we can see how best to coordinate local schedules along with our rail schedules. So all of these are key pieces. And I always welcome feedback on how we do things, and these types of forums allow me to do that. I could probably talk so much longer, and I don't know if I've already gone over the allotted 15 minutes. But the future is bright. I want to make sure that we not only build a system that is serving the public today, but how do we serve the public for future generations and build a strong leadership team that's doing that. And engaging with communities, engaging with businesses on their plans and their needs and their vision is really important for us, so that we can actually talk openly about where we expect to be in the next few years, where do we expect to be in the next 5 years and 10 years. So when development happens, it's not that we don't have enough service, it's us working together to make sure it's the right service. A lot of exciting things, and I guess I'll just end there and welcome.
Thanks. I had a couple questions I wanted to ask, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So I'll give you two at a time. The commuter rail station Newtonville has been approved and it's going to happen. Any idea a timeline on that and what we might see in the rest of that line? Because we'll finally have two-way service in Newton.
Yes. A little history. I mean, I remember, this came up at one of the mayor's meetings, I believe. And I took a visit to the station here in Newton. And, I said to myself, there's two things. We want communities to be proud of our stations, and I definitely needs to be upgraded. The other part is the fact that we can only provide limited peak service because of the way the stations are configured. Maybe short term, that's okay, but long term, we need to do better. Working with Congressman Auchincloss and others, we really work together to say, how do we make dollars go further? We got a lot of support for accessibility grants, and we were successful in getting a $67 million accessibility grant for the Green Line to make those stations more accessible. But the key part about that, and that's why I say when we do work in one area, sometimes it benefits others. That $67 million could free up dollars that we have on stations to actually support delivering Newtonville. So right now, we are continuing to design the Newtonville station. Having said that, I probably will stop at around 30% design, because I want to make sure that lessons learned, we will actually implement and find ways to deliver these things sooner. Once we get the federal dollars from the ASAP, All Accessibility Program, we can start thinking about construction. I don't have a construction timeline, but I always believe time is of the essence. Some of the things maybe, if you had a chance to read, between now and World Cup, we're in the process of building a platform at Foxborough to serve those 7 games, but also serve that whole corridor, because service there will be improved. There are dollars that have been set aside for World Cup. The Craft Group has also supported design, so that partnership is allowing that. But I want to take some of those lessons learned on expediting that build to help make sure that we deliver Newtonville. But yes, it's coming, and we will do that.
Should we be worried about the federal dollars?
You know, I've always said when these federal dollars are, whether we're pursuing them, hoping to win them, right now, I've read a few things that the ASAP program is one that this administration actually is moving forward with. We're trying to confirm that that is the indeed anticipation. I know my conversations with DC, both the USDOT, actually all three, FRA, FTA, the things that we've actually been doing here are the things they would like to see agencies do. How to make taxpayer dollars go further, how to deliver results sooner, how to deliver capital projects that are important. So we actually have a story to tell with them, and I've offered many times to share our successes on streamlining project delivery, streamlining improved results. I'm really not as concerned right now because I think we are building a strong relationship with the new leadership at FRA, FTA, and we have relationships with the staff that are still there. What I might think about is the amount of time that it takes to get these dollars processed. If you've read a lot of attrition at the federal agencies, right? A lot of people have either been let go, incentivized to leave, and then some have left on their own. So it probably is just the timeline to get things going. My conversations with FTA have been that they've not seen anything that implies that this money is in jeopardy right now. So we're just going to keep pushing forward. That's why we're still designing it, and that's why we have every intention of delivering that. The station's important to the area, and even if it's only one of three, I want to deliver that.
Good to hear. So Watertown, over there. Watertown Square the city of Watertown has a great ambitious plan to redo Watertown Square. It's going to really be dependent on buses being part of that. Can you speak a little bit about where that is or how you think about that? And also the bus depot there that's underutilized, that garage. Plans for that?
Well, I haven't had a chance actually to sit down and go through that whole thing, but what I'd like to do is bring my team back. Brian Cohola, my Chief Operating Officer, and the bus folks to make sure we sit down and let's just talk about what you have going for Watertown, and then we can talk about our plans and our schedules. As I mentioned, our bus network is important, and we're continuing to hire bus operators. Even though other agencies have been paused on hiring, we continue to get the support. And we actually have a lot of bus operators in the pipeline that want to come on board, and that allows us to now really think big about bus service, and how do we improve bus service, and how do we make these depots function properly, because more service, more connections, more frequency. The bus network redesign, where we have significant ridership, we want to go to 15-minute frequency, and we've seen where we do that, ridership actually picks up even more. We want our system to be where you're not even having to think about what time is the next bus, train, ferry. It's just that if you happen to miss it, the next one is very conveniently there.
Last question for me, the Needham line. There's some folks in the audience here who are hoping that someday see maybe the orange line replace the commuter rail there. But also Mayor Wu had talked about wanting to build a station at near Centennial Park in West Foxbury, which would serve the south side of Newton. Anything going on with you those?
Well, the mayor's team did reach out about that. We told her certainly we would review and comment on any proposal that the city has. With regards to that corridor, I think we're running about 60-minute headway right now. Our goal ultimately with whether it's Orange Line, regional rail, is to be more frequent. When we start looking at continuing to get more coaches, we have to invest in our locomotives, but I want to invest in greener locomotives. I want to invest and look at how do we start actually making a push towards electrification. Now, until I get there, I do need to make sure our existing locomotives are functioning, because the last thing I can do is start buying purely electric if I don't have the infrastructure to support it. But battery electric is one way for us to start looking at that. And when we can do that, we can actually start improving schedules. Some of the other things that I've been asked about, well, what about this expansion? What about that expansion? And I am always in for those types of projects. As an engineer, I would love nothing more than to build those types of things. And at the same time, I want to make sure that I invest in the existing communities that I'm serving. So for instance, where we have single track territory, I need to eliminate single track. I need to start double tracking. And in some cases, longer trips, I need to be thinking about express tracks, because if I really want folks to use the system, you need to be able to shorten those trips. And as I add stops, I also need to have express trips, because when I add a stop for a local community, I've made someone else's trip that is either going in, east or west of that location longer. So those are the reasons why I've taken a hard look. I've told my team, let's lay out all the expansion projects that folks have asked. But let's look at where our existing pinch points are today, and let's start building out the system so we can run better service. Double tracking where we can and need to will certainly allow us to increase frequency. And where I said longer strips, even if you can't do a third track or express track all corridor, strategically located in bypass locations to allow trains when they need to cross over will be another way that we can start delivering better service. So whether it's regional rail, whether it's Orange Line, I think we can improve the frequency of the trips and the trains. So those are the things that we're working on to be able to really improve service on those corridors. And again, station rebuilds, accessibility, something that I believe are gateways to not only our system, but gateways to the cities. And I want everyone to be proud of their station. I want everyone to say, when you have friends and family, let's not drive, let's take the train, right? Let's take the bus. It's pretty well connected. And when we're running more frequent on everything, multiple seats is pretty good. I mean, I do use the East Boston Ferry. I go to Aquarium, I go on Blue Line, and I go to Government, I get on Green, and 3 seats. When they're right there, when you walk in, it's pretty easy. In the past 2 years ago, when you have 10-minute waits, 15-minute, 20-minute waits, then it's, all bets are off.
Thank you. All right, we're short on time, but we're going to take 2 questions.
Hi, Green Line Rider here. Happy you're adding the safety, braking.
Green Line train protection, yes.
Yeah. Not happy about your reduction in frequency, because frequency is key. Two quick questions. One, we're going to need some more 59 bus service shortly, in about 2 years. A lot of density coming in Main Street, right on the line. And the other one is, when do we get not just electrification service, but everybody's also talking about autonomous vehicles, autonomous subway lines.
Well, Angel is in the back. He's going to record the 59 bus request, and we will take a look at that. Let me just really quickly, because you mentioned Green Line train protection. That is something, when I got here 2 years ago, I had a chance to get a project update. And I was working with the feds, and we were discussing the status of that project. And this was the result of incidents back in 2007, 2008, I believe, unfortunately. The contract that we had at the time was awarded, I believe, in 2017. And there was really no progress that I saw to date that gave me the confidence that if I waited another year, I'd have more progress. So we did make the tough decision to cancel that contract. Nothing I wanted to do, but I felt like we had to, because we were just spinning our wheels there. I am proud, though, that the new contract that we have right now in place, over the last 7 months, we've done more work on delivering Green Line train protection than we did in the previous 7 years. And recently, we finished the outages. So the tunnels are now equipped with all the readers that communicate with the trains. The cars are getting installed with the equipment that will communicate with Wayside and communicate with other trains. We're committed to delivering right now the first phase of the Green Line train protection, which is audible and visual alerts on the trains to the operators, so they will be alerted immediately if they are speeding, and they will be given that warning so they can control the speeds. The next phase, which we're still working to accelerate, is the speed control and the braking. More to follow on that, but we're committed to getting that first audible visual alerts done this year, because we owe it to the public to do that. The part that you said about reduced service on Green Line, this is something internal, and I'll just share a little internal. When we are looking at our schedules and we're looking about adherence to schedules, I talked about drop trips. The Green Line operators and the operations team saw that on certain areas where the Green Line trolleys are interacting with traffic, the run times were longer than our schedules showed. So even though it was reported as a reduction in service, it was actually on paper just written to actually match this level of service that people were experiencing prior to that shift. So I know it was written that you reduce service. It was the service that we can deliver with what we have today. So in reality, it wasn't a reduction. Now, we are taking some cars out to install the equipment, but if the average person were to take a look at the actual run times, it really is negligible. So, but I understand how we need to make sure that the frequency, particularly on the branches, are robust enough that people still want to use the Green Line, which is why the whole effort on not only making it accessible, but getting new fleet is vital. So that's we're focused on making sure that that's done. Did I answer your last question? Well, I think there's opportunities for technology and our workforce to interact. I will say this though, I think as a public servant, I actually like having our employees being available to interact with the public. And I like, if I can, more people in stations, because when we have delays, when we have incidents, I think communication is important. And I also believe, regardless of how we operate a train, we need people, our employees on trains for that type of interaction, safety, opening of doors. There are autonomous systems. At the same time, I've seen our workforce, now that they see we're invested in them and that we are actually helping them, their morale and their intent to deliver even better, I've never seen it so high, and I'm excited about that. So I actually support continuing to have a robust workforce. There's always room for technology, and we'll make sure we leverage that too.
My name is Deirdre O'Connor, and I work for Gibson Sotheby's as a real estate agent. It's kind of a pie in the sky that was thrown out there. High speed from Boston to Worcester. We have such a shortage of housing. Is that on the roadmap at all anymore?
Well, I talked a little bit earlier about taking a look at our infrastructure where we have pinch points, where we need double tracks, where we need triple tracks. Shortening the trip from Worcester is important. I know when we tried to get the Heart to Hub back, there was a challenge on how do we not cancel local trips to be able to include that. I need to actually improve our infrastructure to have more express trains. That's my first goal, to have, as we have more robust local service frequency, and again, the longer trips, I need to find a way to shorten those trips. And that means I need to look at how do I double track, how do I triple track where we need, where it makes sense. So improved trips, higher frequency, and at the right time, higher speed. Now, higher speed generally means less stops because then that needs the infrastructure to run that. That's also why there's been a lot of discussion on some projects. I'm fully committed to ensuring that I can serve one community in one area, but the decisions I make will not preclude my ability to improve service for communities, whether it's east or west, north or south, of a project that we want to support. And I've always believed in there's opportunities to find a win-win in these scenarios, but know that when I make a local decision, I also want to make sure I'm not precluding or making it worse for someone else. And the dialogues like we have here today are important to that.
Thank you very much. Please give me a round of applause. We're grateful for your time today and for your service in general. General Manager, thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Where can we get a tie like that? Father's Day's over, but you know, like it's his birthday.
I had this custom made. It's one of a kind, hand painted.
It's really nice.
Thank you, General Manager Ang. Really appreciate your comments and your leadership. Hello, everyone. Oh, that's really loud. Wow. My name is Max Wolf. I'm the Chamber's Public Policy Manager, and we just heard about some of the great improvements at the T and what they're working on. But I think at the Chamber, we're equally committed to what can we do, what can our communities do to give back and support a thriving transit system. So to help us dig into that, we're going to shift our program into a presentation and then a conversation about a report from Boston Indicators and TransitMatters. It's called Transit Supportive Density in Greater Boston, and it's looking at how cities and towns can create the density needed to support a thriving transit network. I think this report is especially valuable because it shows how much room we have to improve. Our communities often fall short in the things that make transit really viable: housing near transit, job opportunities near transit. So to walk us through these findings, I'm excited to welcome the report's authors. First, Luc Schuster, Executive Director of Boston Indicators, and then Jared Johnson, former Executive Director of TransitMatters, and now the Boston Office Director at Tool Design Group. So I'm going to ask Luc to come up here. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Max. How's this volume? All right. See if I can do the clicker and the mic 1, 2 at the same time. Click ahead. So this is a screenshot of the report cover. Actually, there's 4 or 5 copies of the report on the table if anybody's interested. And go to our website, bostonindicators.org. Some of the screenshots I'm going to show here are dense slides with a lot of information, and I'm mostly going to be showing them as a teaser for more detail that's in the report. General Manager Ang's comments, I think, are a really nice entree to this broader research conversation. We do a lot of population research at Boston Indicators, and one important backdrop to all of this to keep in mind is that we're a region and a state that has really stagnated for about a decade now. We're losing many families, especially young families with children, to other parts of the country due to, in particular, rising housing costs. Fortunately, over the last decade or so, for the most part, the folks moving out of state due to those cost pressures have been offset by new immigrants coming from abroad. I'm really worried about how much that's going to shift, is literally shifting sort of right now. And as we get updated data on these population trends, we're going to see the sort of continued outmigration of young families, but no longer being offset by immigration coming to the region. So if we want the transportation sort of vision that General Manager Ang teed up here around a truly high-functioning regional rail system where trains are, coming throughout the commuter rail network every 10, 15, 20 minutes throughout the day rather than just around peak times over the course of the weekend. It needs to be a much broader conversation than just about what the general manager can do from within the MBTA. And so the contribution this report makes in one important way is to focus us on the synergy between having enough people around our transit nodes in the first place in order to justify greater investments and expansions in the whole system. So I'm going to quickly present some top-line findings for the first couple sections of the report, and then I'll pass it to Jared, who will do the second two. So the first thing we did in the report was a broad literature review of the academic research around what are minimum density thresholds you need to justify different sorts of transit frequencies. Really quickly, we realized how complicated this actually gets. There's different ways to think about density, And obviously you have very different types of transit service, and depending on the type of transit service you're aiming for, you're going to need different population densities. The MBTA and the MAPC, the Regional Planning Agency, have a neat combined metric on population and employment. That's really useful. For simplicity, honestly, in our report, we really focus on residential population density measures, but that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking in a very similar way at employment density. And then the different categories of transit, you look at Regional Transit Authority bus service is just very different from, red line service in the urban core. So here's one of these teaser slides. It's especially going to be tough for folks in the back, but this is a sort of flow chart we produced in the report, which plots different research estimates of density thresholds for effective transit services. And you can see a wide spectrum from, the low end of 4 people per acre up to 45 people per acre. We identify a clustering at a couple of key points here at around 10 to 20 people per acre to justify bus service or infrequent commuter rail service, and then at around 40 people per acre to justify rapid transit service. And so here's a table we have in the report that summarizes the benchmarks that we end up comparing Greater Boston to as a kind of consistent through line in the report. And I'll just highlight, we translate people per acre to housing units per acre. One reason we decided to do that is because of the MBTA Communities Act. People, I think, are sort of conditioned now to think about units per acre as a key benchmark, especially in our region. So based on the research here, for moderate frequency service, the research suggests you need about 6 units per acre, and then about 16 for high frequency service. And I suspect MBTA communities will come up in the conversation afterwards, but one way to think about this, right? MBTA communities, it varies by municipality, but the sort of consistent number is needing at least 15 units per acre of zoned capacity. That's a ceiling of zoned capacity, right? It's no requirement that you actually build out to that level. The research benchmarks are saying at a minimum, we should be getting 16 units per acre of actually built out housing. So I'm going to show a few slides that summarize our analysis of what we've actually got in Greater Boston, and then I'll pass it to Jared. So this is average housing densities for rapid transit, for bus, commuter rail, and regional transit authorities. And what you really want to do comparing is you want to compare the rapid transit blue line to the 16 unit per acre benchmark, and we're below that. And then each of these roughly to the 6 unit per acre benchmark. So probably no surprise, but on average, each of these segments of our system is not anywhere close to even those minimum research benchmark densities. So this slide looks at the number of station areas within the rapid transit system that meets the 16 unit per acre benchmark. Again, this is focusing just within rapid transit for a second. And you can see, again, a real mix. Green line doing relatively well compared to some of the others. The red line, only 5 of the station areas are meeting that 16 unit per acre benchmark. There's a few caveats here. This is imperfect data region-wide. There certainly are some new developments like around Assembly in Somerville near where I live that those housing units have come on after the data here. But in broad strokes, there are many station areas that are far below these benchmarks. This is a really cruel teaser because it's so dense, but just to show you that we've got these estimates for every station area in the rapid transit network. The green line overall, actually a little bit above that 16 unit per acre benchmark, which is good. The silver line at 18. But let me just highlight for the sake of this conversation quickly. I'm going to zoom in on the D branch. D branch of the green line is one line that has actually among the best frequencies and reliability within the green line network. And it's just Fenway that's well above the 16 unit per acre benchmark, and then it really tapers off as we go further out. Let me end with 2 slides on the commuter rail. This looks at residential density around all commuter rail stations region-wide and just plots it from highest to lowest. We've just highlighted a few random sample ones to orient your eye. But top line here, there's only 6 commuter rail station areas that hit the 16 unit per acre benchmark. Maybe that's a little high because that's really more of the rapid transit benchmark. But even if you just look at the 6 unit per acre benchmark, I think it's 102 of the 134 commuter rail station area station areas in the system are below that 6 unit per acre benchmark, and tons of them are at the sort of 2-3 unit per acre level. So one of the findings from this is just the sentiment. It's probably not surprising, but that a lot of the lowest hanging fruit for more housing density near transit in our full region comes around these commuter rail nodes that are sort of in the inner ring suburbs closest to Boston. And so this final graph looks just at the Worcester line, and we cut it just at the station areas that are within a 30-minute train ride from Boston. And you can just see, it won't be a surprising story to you, but how quickly these density levels drop off. And by the time you get to Newtonville and beyond, consistently well below that 6 unit per acre benchmark. Okay, to keep it chugging, I'll pass it to Jared.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the transportation infrastructure, and just to sort of put a finer point on what Luc was saying. When we did a look at ridership per mile, even though the Boston area is known as being pretty dense and walkable, the MBTA was kind of squarely in the middle to the bottom middle of ridership on a per mile basis, right? And I think a lot of that does align with the units per acre that you're seeing. So. Some of the exciting things, and I'll go over this, fairly quickly because the general manager talked about a lot of this. But even though the MBTA has challenges, there are some really exciting things happening. The MBTA is redoing their bus network and adding a lot more lines that are going to have 15-minute frequencies. I think right now there are 11 key routes that have close to 15-minute frequencies. I think by the end of this process, it's going to be closer to 40. So a lot more routes that are going to have frequent all-day service. And what that can mean is, this just gives a couple of examples. I think we're looking at Minneapolis, we're looking at Connecticut, and I believe that one is Maryland. But buses can be a really great tool for providing really great service. And as we see in this example from Minneapolis, they can actually be TOD, anchors of TOD themselves. And then this image of Connecticut is great because it shows this is called the Fast Tracks BRT network, and it's a BRT line that uses old rail right-of-ways and provides suburban connectivity between cities. Also, as we talked about, 15-minute frequencies coming to commuter rail is going to be huge. Right now there's quite a bit of a variation between peak and off-peak, but as the general manager said, that is quickly changing, and we're moving to a system that's going to have 15-minute service on all the lines. And so even before, one of the things that I think is great about what the general manager and his team is doing is, it's not going to be just flip a switch and then we'll have this 15-minute service. There actually are projects being funded right now to allow for, to go from hourly to 30-minute service, and to have some of the double track projects that he talked about, and then also to have trains sort of turn around, because obviously there's a lot more demand the closer you're into Boston. So if some of the trains can turn around, you can increase the service frequency even before we have electrification. One of the other things that we did in the report is we did station area case studies and sort of kind of broke communities down into sort of different groups based on the demand and based on the density and based on how good the transit service was. So one of these communities that we talked about, not very far from here, Forest Hills and Jamaica Plain, a very, very, very well connected station that has access to a number of commuter rail lines, mostly the Needham line, although some of the other lines do stop there. It's a major bus hub for Southwest Boston, and of course has the Orange Line, which in a few years is going to have trains every 3.5 minutes. But yet, a large part of the density still looks, or the zoning, is only allowing for 2 and 3 family homes. There are some larger developments that have happened on the main street, but if we're thinking about how do we maximize what we have, continuing to have relatively low density next to such a monumental transit hub is not going to help us with ridership and help us with sort of the T's long-term financial sustainability. Needham is another community that we talked about that has a pretty rich transit. I mean, I know that right now the commuter rail is only once an hour, but it is pretty close to Boston with that, especially with the commuter rail service. And as the general manager talked about, they're going to be piloting the battery electric multiple units here shortly. So, I think it's only going to get even more connected. And Needham is a fairly walkable community, but as you can see, pretty low density. And I know there was a question about the orange line, green line. This refers to the fact that the Needham line uses the Southwest Corridor, which is also the same line that the Amtrak trains use. And so as Amtrak wants to double their frequencies, as you have more trains coming from Providence, and as eventually at some point, the second phase of South Coast Rail is having trains from Fall River and New Bedford go up via the Stoughton line and via that line. So at some point, there may become a breaking point to where Needham line passengers either have to have a forced transfer at Forest Hills, or we have to figure out some combination of orange line or orange line, green line for the future. So some of this is thinking about how do we plan ahead? It's not just about the transit service we have today, but what kind of density do we want to have to support the transit service that is coming. So this is a graphic that's just showing the housing units that have been built, and so primarily single family homes that have been permitted. And so if we think about again how are we building a unit mix that's going to support green line or even just having commuter rail trains every 15 minutes. This is definitely something that needs some attention. We also wanted to highlight, though, that there are some places that have decent transit, but where there's not a ton of housing demand. And so this is an area where, and Brockton has a lot of unused or underutilized land. And so really this is an area where better transit, I think, can help to stimulate that demand, because you have a city that is, pretty close to Boston, but still is not seeing some of the demand that we see in other communities. And then final section is regional comparison. So, we also wanted to show what are other, cities and regions around North America, what are they doing? So I think New Jersey is a very interesting sort of case study. It's a state that has a lot of similarities to ours. They actually, in Massachusetts we have 40B, but they actually have a court-mandated settlement that requires cities and towns to actually build affordable housing and to densify, and they have a lot of state-supported programs like this Transit Village initiative that is a partnership between the state and Rutgers University that encourages TOD around the state, and it's led to some pretty exciting changes, right? Just turning this parking lot near a commuter rail station into hundreds of homes, and looks like I'm seeing a parking garage there. So even still having the parking so that folks can park and ride there and can still frequent the local businesses. But now instead of just the folks that can park in that business, park in that lot, all the local businesses now have hundreds of additional patrons. And so this is just showing a little stat that because of New Jersey's real push on building more housing and on having this concentrated TOD effort, they've been able to see stronger growth than Massachusetts. And so this is an example of one of those towns. This is Cranford, and this is a city that their town where the town actually sort of led the process to get certified as a transit village community. And you see just some great examples of suburban town center infill that I think fits in really well and has seen, I think, the ridership almost double from that station over the last 10 years or so. Another sort of thing that we're seeing, I mean, actually this is Watertown right there, so we've already got some great examples of TOD happening. But one of the other things that is I think a big part of how we can contextually add density is to look at suburban retrofit. We've got a lot of strip malls that are either past their prime, or certainly as we start to think about municipal budgets, there's just better, more tax yielding uses of that land rather than big box stores with 60% of the land being parking lots. And so there's a whole movement around suburban retrofits. This is a great example from Tacoma Park in DC, where they're turning a a park and ride and bus loop into housing, open space, and still retaining all of the bus loops, reduction on the park and ride spaces, but I think it'll be okay. You can also in some smaller towns, you can also see some great examples of sort of townhome style density. This is in Seattle. And then, we've also got, when you've got a larger site, you can also look at this larger TOD, and again, a great example here from the Boston area, where Assembly Row has just been really incredible for Somerville, raising its tax base, a lot of new jobs, and paying for a commuter rail station. I think paying for an Orange Line station. As we talk about, the uncertain, funding environment for the future for transportation, I do think that having private investment in transit is going to be a really critical part. And then another example from the DC area, this is Arlington, Virginia, where they had a strategy of, they knew the train was coming there and they wanted to densify, but there was a real push to try to preserve the quiet residential streets. And so the only way that you can do that while adding density and while supporting the transit is to have that density along the main street, sort of a corridor approach. So that's something that towns can look at as well. And then what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, the word is escaping me, but I did want to show this to show that there are some cases where larger buildings can be appropriate. This is an example from Boston. This is a development called Market Central that's there. That's these two images there, where there was a big fight about this taller building, this tower, but in exchange, it got 60 units of affordable housing, historic preservation dollars to completely rebuild 2 older historic properties. Nearly all of the tenants are small local businesses, and paid for this beautiful plaza and bike infrastructure as part of it. So, I think there's a lot of sort of fear that, TOD has to mean, Manhattanization or towers everywhere, and it doesn't have to be. But I think you do need to make sure that in certain cases that I think there's certain places where contextual towers can add not only a lot of density but have the financial resources to be able to provide a lot of benefits. So that's the end of the presentation. Looking forward to some questions.
Thank you, Jared and Luke, and we're going to transition into a short panel. So I'll invite the panelists to come to the table. So thank you so much. Great presentation, Jared and Luke. And now we're also going to bring a local voice, Amy Dain, from the Newton Planning Board and from Dain Research as well, a zoning expert in Massachusetts, and we're really excited to hear that local perspective. So thank you for being with us today, Amy. I really love the report, and so often the narrative is how we need to wait for transit improvements before we build more housing or upgrade service only after development comes. And I think that's why I appreciate your report. It really turns it on its head and saying, well, transit can support housing too, or housing can support transit too, rather, and emphasizes that housing density is really essential. And it kind of brings up the classic question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Service improvements or increased density? Maybe it's both, either or. So I wanted to start with Jared on this. What comes first?
Yeah, it's either or, right? I think you have to be really opportunistic. I think when there's money available for service improvements, even if the density isn't there yet, then take advantage of that, add service there. Then make sure that the zoning is changed so that it's flexible, so that you later on can add that density. But you should absolutely do that. And the opposite is true. That if there is if there's space available, you should add that density and then work with the MBTA to add service there. Look at some of the innovative things that we've already had in Massachusetts with our transportation management authorities, our TMAs that provide shuttles. And then, one of the other things I think it's really important is that commutes only make up about 18% of our trips. And so if you can, you might not be able to give folks, great transit access to a bunch of jobs, but if they can walk to the grocery store, if they're by a multi-use path and can easily, sort of roll to the town center, then that's a way that you can add density. And even if the transit isn't there yet. So I think it's a either or. Whatever opportunity first presents itself, that's what you should seize on.
Yeah, and Luc or Amy, any opinions on what comes first, the service improvements or the density?
I think that you want to seize your opportunities, that our goal is to both improve transportation and to get the housing that we need to have abundant housing for our people. And so when you have opportunities to do one or the other, you should go for it and not let one or the other hold you back, but to keep the goal in mind that we're working in tandem to both get enough housing and the transportation that the region should have.
Not much to add.
Yeah, I think you guys summed it up well. And, on a similar note, a lot of this really sounds like MBTA communities. I mean, did MBTA communities solve this? I mean, it's really in the same vein. So I'm wondering, Amy, was MBTA communities the solution here? Why not sit back and see what gets built?
Right. So I just wanted to talk a bit about the context of what the zoning for the region was before MBTA communities came in. And by the way, I just wanted to add, I actually just started a new job at Boston Indicators at the Boston Foundation as a senior fellow after several years of working at Dain Research. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk about these issues I care a lot about. I've done a lot of research about zoning policy and municipal plans for more housing all across the region. I've surveyed the zoning and plans for 100 cities and towns in Greater Boston. And what I found was really that we have little land zoned for multifamily housing all across the region. And that would be okay if we could build really tall on the little bits of land that we have zoned for multifamily housing, because you could meet demand by building up or building out. But what I found was in that bits of land that we have zoned for multifamily housing, you can't build particularly high. And so the zoning really isn't allowing for enough housing to meet demand for housing. The other two things I found in that research was that we have a system of largely discretionary permitting for housing, where there's a lot of project review for projects coming through, and also that we're doing a lot of parcel by parcel decision making about where multifamily housing should go. So a lot of town meetings and city councils are reviewing projects project by project instead of developers going to like the building department to get a permit from the inspector. Do they meet the requirements? They actually have to go to town meeting and have that multifamily development approved. And then the third finding was that cities and towns have been allowing incremental growth in the town centers. There had been some progress based on a lot of advocacy to allow that, the sort of smart growth, walkability, transit-connected development, and then a lot more development on the edges of municipalities, so like along the 128 corridor, along major highways, any place where you could find a piece of property between a highway, train tracks, and water, sort of isolated from any residences, like that's where the tall development would go in Greater Boston, sort of disconnected. So that was the context before MBTA communities. So that's sort of a big picture. What I would say from my analysis of MBTA communities, where we're at now of 130 roughly communities now coming into compliance, was that the law was written and the implementation guidelines with a lot of flexibility. And so many communities sort of came into compliance with what we're calling paper compliance, where they technically comply, but they're not really allowing for much more housing to be built than was allowed before. Other places are going beyond paper compliance, but really just allowing a marginal amount. So it's an improvement, it's an incremental improvement. It's important that we have that law, but not solving the issues that I've talked about. We're not going to get enough housing through that is pretty clear at this point. So we're going to be needing to look at more solutions to get more transit-oriented development that we need, more development in city and town centers, and also just development that's not as expensive, because this discretionary review process is adding to the cost of development, not only not getting us enough projects across the finish line, but it's actually like adding a lot of costs in the amount of time the staffing developers have to put into the permitting process and all of that. So we do need more reform coming down the road.
Thanks, Amy. And Luke, you mentioned that 16-unit threshold that's in the report, and how that's a minimum, but MBTA community sees it as a maximum. I'm wondering if you could explain that a little bit more. And do you see MBTA communities as a solution to a lot of the problems you outlined here?
Sure, yeah. And there's two things to keep in mind comparing the 15 unit per acre number in the context of MBTA communities with the 16 unit per acre number in my presentation. So one is what you said, that the research benchmarks really suggest, and again, there's no perfect science here, but a rough clustering at around 60 units per acre as a minimum number of built out units. So sorry, I'm conflating the two already, but so it's minimum versus a maximum. But then the key thing is zoned capacity versus actual built out. And this is something sort of understandably has been really confused in the local discussions around MBTA communities, and thinking of it's not just the 15 unit per acre number, but a lot of communities know specifically the target capacity they have under the law. It might be 600 units of zone capacity that you need in the zone that you're adopting. And people interpret that as 600 homes that need to get built. I see a lot of people nodding. In practice, zone capacity is often far, far higher than what actually gets built in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that's the other piece of it. So big picture, my take on MBTA communities, really consistent with what Amy said. I feel like really important step forward. One conceptual thing that's really important is it's the state recognizing that we have a shared regional economy. People live, work, and play regionally. We need to address these challenges regionally. The fragmentation of 351 separate municipalities determining these things one by one has not been serving us well. It's gotten us into this problem. So the fact that the state is frankly pretty gradually moving towards more collective action, I think is really good. It's just a modest step, and we'll need more on top of it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Jared, if you want to add anything, but I also wanted to ask you, Jared, what is density around these transit nodes? What does it allow us to do with walkability, parking? What does it allow us to unlock? And finally, you talked a little bit about tax base and attracting commercial development. I wonder what the connection is there. So a lot to chew on, but I'll take a step.
Yeah. I think density allows us to have more robust transit. Whenever retailers, restaurateurs, grocery store, there's always a call for, I wish we had more groceries. I wish we had a Trader Joe's. They're looking at the number of people that are within a walking distance. So I think density is just really important for allowing us to have more choice. It obviously, it incentivizes. If you're making decisions about where to send buses, right? I know the general manager talked about that they are adding more drivers, but still, it's a they're probably sort of netting out like 1.7 drivers sort of out of this replacement ratio there, because there's so many folks that are retiring. So they still are making very finite decisions about sort of where to send bus service, where to expand bus service, and being able to point to, hey, look at the density that is in this census tract. Look at, and an added bonus, look at the density that's in this census tract, and the fact that we've built all of these units with one parking unit per unit, sorry, one parking space per unit, or 0.5 parking spaces per unit. These are all decisions that I think help tilt the balance and say, okay, yeah, we should expand service here, or the ridership on this route has not been as great. Yeah, it makes sense to shift some of those resources there. So I think that's some of what density does. And as far as sort of attracting commercial, the tax base question, I think there's two elements to it. I think I think there's been a lot of research on the fact that folks are having fewer kids, they're having later, and so the idea that, oh my gosh, if we build housing, particularly one bedrooms and studios, we're gonna just be flooded with the schools, just has really not turned out to be true. So I think that's one thing, is that I think we should acknowledge that well-designed, dense multifamily housing can actually be a benefit to your tax base. and it also makes your town more attractive to commercial developers who are commercial development and companies that are thinking about relocating there, right? Because again, that density means their folks are going to be able to have places to live close by the office. You know, that density probably means that you've got more restaurants and you've got more things there. Again, these are all things that folks are looking at in order to decide that they're going to relocate there. So I think a lot of this is just really rethinking how we think about taxation and how we think about what is or is not a burden.
Yeah. Amy or Luke, anything to add there in terms of what density allows us to do, especially with parking, because it's such a big conversation in our communities.
Sure.
Oh,
So
sorry, Rob. There you go.
Greater Boston is no small town. This is a major metropolis that's highly successful, a wonderful place to live, major city and metropolitan area. Throughout the history of the world and America, until the 1970s, people moved to opportunity. When you've got great jobs and you've got success, people move to those areas for jobs. That pattern in America slowed down starting in the 1970s, and the understanding is one of the reasons is that successful metropolitan areas, many of them in America, have not been letting the housing supply keep up with demand for housing for people moving to jobs. So this slowdown in development of housing to not match the demand for it in the metropolitan area has a lot to do with the economic polarization of the country and the different opportunities people face across the country and even within the region, where we've been allowing for multifamily housing and rental housing to be concentrated in certain areas and really kept out of other areas that are more exclusive. So it has a lot of impacts on the country, on the demographics, on economic opportunity, on how the whole civic fabric functions. And I think that we have a ton of opportunities here because Greater Boston is so wonderful. And one of the things I really love about it is that we were built out as a region before cars became the dominant way of getting around. So we have these train tracks and now these bike rail trails. We've got sidewalks, we've got walkability, we have historic downtowns, we have mixed uses, we have schools in walking distance of houses. We have got this phenomenal fabric, this civic urban fabric throughout the region that we can build on. So we're not just trying to figure out in Greater Boston how do we do sprawl retrofit, which is incredibly hard, and we do have areas where we need to think about that on car-oriented strip mall corridors. How do you retrofit that for walkability and transit connectedness? That's hard. That is something we need to think about. But some of our job is just figuring out how to get a few taller buildings right in our town centers, right at our train stations. And we do have a lot of tools available for that. And then the one other big thing I just wanted to leave you with while I've got your attention is one of the things in that 2019 study when I looked at all the zoning is I wanted to figure out what are the growth centers in Greater Boston. And I read plan after plan trying to figure this out. And nobody would name them. There were a couple named, I don't know who's here from Watertown. I could figure out that the Arsenal Street Corridor and Pleasant Street Corridors, that was kind of designated as a growth district and zoned for it, and planning went into it. But largely across the region, I couldn't find these places. Politically, it's really hard to say it, and that goes with the parcel by parcel rezoning. But how do you plan for these upgrades, better sidewalks, better parking infrastructure, better transit, when you can't even know where the growth is gonna go until it's permitted? And so I think that this is an opportunity for the state and for our regional agencies and our different planning bodies to really think about where do we want to grow, how do we want to grow, how do we leverage that growth to invest in the infrastructure that supports the growth so that we're becoming an even better place and not a place where everybody's stuck in traffic.
Thanks. Anything to add on? Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Anything to add, Luke, on parking or anything related to that?
Tough to top that. No. Actually, sorry, Jerry, this will be so quick, but can I? Amy has a really neat Instagram account. If anybody's, she's been going on a tour of these regional downtowns, and something I so appreciate about her contribution to these conversations is a love of the region and reminding us that we've got great bones to build upon. So check out her Instagram for photos of those tours of the region.
Okay, and we're going to get back to audience questions in a second, but a couple more things. You know, we have this great commuter rail system, or it has a great potential, and I wanted to go to Jared on this and really explain the potential of regional rail, because, you know, in the study you have, you know, modest densities around commuter rail, what you expect, but as you see the MBTA grow and regional rail hopefully come to the Worcester and maybe even Needham lines, how do you think we should respond to that as a community?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some places we're going to be talking about a service that is, you know, maybe just a hair below rapid transit, right? I mean, we're talking about, you know, very large vehicles that can handle hundreds of folks at a time, coming every 15 minutes. In some cases, if the services are able to sort of overlap, particularly thinking about the Worcester line where there's going to be express and local, you know, you may have a train from some stations every 7.5 minutes. So, you know, I think that is going to just dramatically change the paradigm, right? And I think this is why, you know, we sort of pushed for not calling it commuter rail anymore and coming up with a new name, because, you know, our goal is that this is not just about commuting, that this is a service. You know, right now it would seem a little weird to say, oh, I'm going to take the commuter rail just one stop to go get groceries because of all the planning and the, you know, all of that. But, you know, if we get to a place where that service is coming every 15 minutes and where hopefully we've done some better TOD, we've turned some of those parking lots into structured parking with a multi-use mixed-use development on it, then it would make perfect sense to just, you know, pop over one stop, go to the grocery store that's right on top of the station, go across the street, grab some coffee, and come back. So I think it will change the paradigm of what we use these systems for, and to know that you know, right now we've got for a lot of, you know, working parents, or even someone who's maybe taking care of older parents, you know, they may not use commuter rail because, you know, they need to be able to make sure that they can get to where they can make sure they need to make sure they can get to their destination if they have an emergency. But if you've got service every 15 minutes all day long, you know, then it starts to become a much more reliable option. So, you know, again, I'm hoping that this can become, you know, not just, you know, you park your car and leave there, but that these stations can become hubs of activity, can become, you know, neighborhoods and nodes in and of themselves.
Yeah, definitely great points. So we're going to open up to audience questions. I'm going to stand up and walk around. Okay, right there in the back.
Hello, this is Ron. Can you hear me? I'm Ben Crowther. I'm a resident in West Roxbury. And I'm kind of curious, you know, how building housing so much of it falls to local zoning, right? But I'm curious where you three see the role of the MBTA here in building housing. I'm thinking particularly along the Needham line, right? West Roxbury has so many parking lots that are owned by the MBTA that aren't at full capacity most of the time. Rossendale the same. I don't know exactly further in Needham what the degree those parking lots are used, but where do you see the MBTA's role in supporting this and creating more density right proximate to stations?
Did Amy plant you for this question?
I came prepared for that question. So let me see, actually, where do I want to start on that? The state has historically, in past decades, deferred to local zoning for state-owned properties. And there was this big change that happened last summer with the adoption of the state's Affordable Homes Act, that there was actually a new precedent put into it where they said that on state-owned properties that they were going to inventory this year and dispose of, or put through disposition and sell or gift, that those properties could, developments that have at least 4 units per acre would be exempt from local zoning. So this was a new precedent of the state saying if we're these state-owned properties, we're going to allow at least that density. Now, 4 units per acre, as we just talked about, that's something in like areas where you've got single-family zoning on 2-acre lots and septic systems, and then that's allowing a bit more density. But in any urban area, well-settled area, and MBTA parking lots, like that doesn't mean a whole lot. But this raises the question of if we should be using the levers of state policy to take a little bit more leadership on thinking about what densities are appropriate on MBTA and Department of Transportation properties. And there are real opportunities there. So the state just went through a process of inventorying properties that are managed by DCAM. It's the Division of Assets and Capital Management and Maintenance. And those are the properties that are now zoned at least 4 units per acre. But they're really in like some scattered locations. There are some right in downtown Boston, and it's the MCI Concord, former correctional facility is a part of that inventory. So there's a mix of properties there. But I think that where there's actually a lot more opportunity is on the MBTA properties. We've seen some of this development already at Woodland and Newton, and there are different stations that have been developed across the region, especially in the city of Boston. But there are a lot of opportunities where we could see a lot more housing. The way it is now, it's a very slow process of going through local zoning, and that has held up some properties from getting developed. And so my recommendation would be to have stronger state leadership in that process.
Anything to add, Luc or Jared?
Yeah, and I'll just say shortly that I think it's also going to be in the MBTA's interest. As the general manager talked about, still a long way to go with that state of good repair, and so I think not only can some of this development add new stations like we saw at Assembly, but I think they can also be partners in replacing bus garages, replacing stations, all of that. So again, I think it's in the MBTA's interest as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Affordable Homes Act, that new provision. I think we're going to see that in Wellesley real soon. So, more questions? Yeah.
So, Amy, quick question. You mentioned the cost of all the permitting and the delays to the permitting because of local permitting requirements. I was wondering if you could put a number on that.
This is something I've also been thinking about and talking to developers about. I don't have a precise number. My research hasn't really surveyed a lot of developers. I was just speaking with one developer recently and trying to figure out with him what the cost of the process adds for him. And we came to tens of thousands. I was asking he's building backyard cottages, ADUs, across multiple municipalities. And often, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you've got a lot of developers of small scale or modestly scaled multifamily development or residential development tend to work in a few municipalities because of all the time it takes to learn the local codes, build relationships with the decision makers, understand what the code enforcers, how they interpret the building code and all the local regulations. It's a steep learning curve. So developers tend to stay in a few communities, and that prevents economies of scale for some firms. But this one developer I was talking to is trying to work really statewide and across New England building ADUs, and that would be great, these modestly sized houses across the region. But he's having to hire a lot of high-skilled pre-construction managers to just get up to speed on the unique permitting requirements and interpretations town by town, and it's making his business model really hard. It's hard to scale and hard to make money and hard to sustain. So it adds costs in several ways by the staff he has to hire to manage it. Time is cost. I was talking to another developer who was saying the whole name of his game is the turnaround time for selling a property, because then he can take that capital and put it into the next one. He can make money if he can do it quickly. So the time is adding money, and then also the added reviews can end up leading to more engineering than had been planned or might be necessary. And sometimes the codes contradict each other, or like you make a plan with one board and then that has downstream effects. So another board's then not happy with the changes that were made, adds costs to the engineering. So he was agreeing with me that for one unit of housing, that process sometimes could add up to like $100,000 to the cost of housing. So that's just what that process is adding in direct costs to bring you a unit of housing. Then some units don't end up penciling, or clients fall through, and then that shortage causes further housing price escalation. So it has that like indirect effect on the price of housing too.
Well, and I was just at the Congress for New Urbanism conference, and they had a developer speaking about this, and I think he said about 20 to 25% is the cost of permitting and legal. And so this is where things like pre-approved building plans, things like that, can come into play if we're talking about both how do we make housing more affordable. That's a huge part of it, and then to put a finer point on what you said around only developers kind of tend to stick in a community. If you're in a community where you're like, geez, it's the same developers, or you have some tricky ones, then this is a big part of it, right? That the steep learning curve keeps folks out and keeps that pool of developers the same, for better or worse.
Thank you. Sorry, we do not have any more time for questions, but we will send out the report after the fact so you can all read it. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much for the panel. Let's give a applause.